Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we've got another special guest. Man, we're just flip-flopping states, sounds like. Matt Frentheway is up in Park City, Utah. It's beautiful up there, especially this time of year, spring. It's just the snow is starting to melt, or it's getting there. I would say it's all melted, but it's getting there. Two favorite times to be in Park City is in the fall and in the spring. That's for me, at least. It's a beautiful place. Matt, he actually started out as a financial professional and an appraiser for Aspen Appraisal Group, and then decided, time to start his own businesses, and started a Legends boxing franchise. So maybe you've seen those around town, or you've seen them around. I know a few people involved there, but he liked the franchise game, franchised his own business, and then decided, hey, what if I just could help other people find their dream business? So often as business owners or potential business owners, people who think about they're going to go into business, they think that they have to go create a business and that they're not really a real entrepreneur, a real business owner, unless they go create it themselves. And I don't think anything could be farther from the truth. I don't see any reason not to use the tools necessary. And if you can go in and walk into a thriving business that's already running, why not do that? So what we're going to talk to Matt about today is how can we do that? What's the process? How do we know if that's the right pathway for us? And he can absolutely help you. So go ahead, Matt, and share with us your history and how you got to where you are, because there's a long history there about development and you finding your passion. I'd like to hear about kind of where you came from and how you found your passion.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm happy to be on the show, Samuel. So back in the day, I went to Arizona State. That's where we flip-flop states at. Samuel lives in Arizona, used to live in Utah, but after I graduated from Arizona State, I moved to Colorado to become a veterinarian. And during that, I had a year to wait. And during that year, I started putting together numbers on how much it was going to cost to get through veterinary school and how much money I could make coming out of it. And I would have to be a business owner on top of it. And I was like, well, that's pretty expensive. I really don't like animals that much. So I switched gears and I became a financial advisor. The company I was a financial advisor with was at the time called Payne Weber. Then they merged with UBS, and now it's just called UBS now. But I started that back in 98 or so. And I was out in New York City for training on 9/11 when that happened. So I was actually sitting across the Hudson Bay, across from the financial district, and we were in a training class, and we came in and announced that the Twin Towers, had been hit by planes, and I went out and watched them be on fire and fall, and then I was stuck there for 3 weeks after that. So at that point in time, my passion was financial advice, and the reason why is my passion is because I enjoy finances, I really enjoy business, but more important, I enjoyed helping people. But when 9/11 happened, I felt powerless. I got all these phone calls from my clients worried about their money. There really wasn't much I could do about it. I didn't have much control over the stocks or anything. And so it really was a pivotal moment in my life. And I started reassessing my situation and reassessing what I wanted to do in life. And financial advising just didn't fit the mold anymore for me. So I moved on from that experience and became a business owner. I owned a real estate appraisal company for a while, and then 2008 happened. So again, I was powerless. I made it through 2008 by the skin of my teeth, but when that ended, when things started to get better, I vowed I'm not going to be in another powerless situation, having my clients taken away from me like the mortgage industry did or the banking industry did with my appraisal clients. And so I looked for something else, and I came across a boxing concept called Legends Boxing. One of my best friends owned it in Lehi, Utah, and he wanted to partner with me to scale it and make it more operational. And at the time, we just wanted to scale one location, but we got it really successful. And we're like, well, why don't we just grow this? But we didn't have the capital to grow more corporate locations. So the next best option was franchising. And so my partner and I made it into a national franchise. And that's really where I sit now. I sold my interest in that a few years ago and became a franchise consultant. And now I have the best of all the worlds, business, finances, and I really get to help people find the right business to own, which is my passion, is helping people. And I do have some control over it, unlike in the stock market or with appraisals.
Yeah, a little bit more control. So what led you to Arizona State? Did you grow up in Arizona or did you grow up in Utah?
I actually grew up in Wyoming, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Yeah. And then my parents moved to Arizona when I graduated from high school. So then I went to Arizona State.
Okay. Cool. And then what along the way, is that something that I've seen happen often with business owners? And again, I have no idea, but as far as relationship and marriage and family, and how did that all play into all of this roller coaster of different careers that you've had over the years?
Well, that's a really good question. So I was married at the time right when I came out of college. I got married. And when I was waiting to go to veterinary school and all that, I was married, started having kids right away. And so financial advising certainly had a good career path to support a family. But because of the whole 9/11 incident, I needed to move on. But I have 5 boys. So they're spaced out every 2 or 3 years. And honestly, in the beginning of my financial advising career and my business ownership career, it was in survival mode a lot of times for me. So I really had to hustle and make things happen in my businesses to pay the bills, because my bills were so big with 5 boys and a wife to support. So, I mean, I think as far as the role that plays in my life, it made me hustle, made me have to be creative. It made me have to have some stick-to-itiveness. And it was an all in all positive thing, although painful sometimes.
Sure. And then with your 5 boys, what are the ages now, and how is your example as a business owner and an entrepreneur, how has that affected them, that generation down?
No, that's a great question. So they range from 24 years old down to 14 years old. I'm almost an empty nester. I pretty much have one kid at home. The rest of them are 18 or over. I have one child that started a business so far. He's 19 or so. He's removing tree roots from trees that have been cut down in people's yards. He's got a tree root removal machine. It's pretty exciting to see him own the business. None of my other kids have really gotten into business ownership yet, but they've certainly learned how to hustle. And and they've also learned how to chase their passions. And so 3 of my boys work at the same bike shop here in Utah because that's their passion, is mountain biking and skiing. And though they don't make a lot of money, they are chasing their passion, and they're just overall happy in life. And I think that's what they got from me as far as chasing your passion. And it doesn't really matter about the quantity of things, but it's the quality of things that's the most important. I think my kids got that from me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's huge. And the sooner you can learn that in life, the better. I don't know exactly what age I would say I learned it the most powerfully, but I do know that by the time I was about 20, 22 years old, I was realizing that I was unemployable. So that kind of like, I was doing summer sales, and you go to school similar to you, get out of school, go to Colorado, vet school, and then you look at it and you're like, man, this track record of like how many years it's going to take, what my top income's going to be, all the crap that goes into that, that's not the life that I want. It's like, yeah, you might be able to make money, but it's a long ways away. And vets have to know more than like an actual doctor, because they have to know lots of different animals types, not just one.
That's right.
But yeah, that's crazy. I had a similar experience and realized I can make more money in 3 months than most people make every year. It's hard to go get a job, at that point. So what about your backstory as far as your parents? What was growing up like that? Where do you feel like you got a lot of your entrepreneurial drive from yourself?
That's a great question. So my dad was a ER physician, so he was a doctor. He'd gone through medical school, been in the Air Force, all that. But on top of that, he was a medical director. So he was part of a company. This is where his entrepreneur side came in, is he was part of a company, owned a company that they would go make contracts with hospitals to run the ER. So the staffing, they would staff the ER for the hospital, and that was their business, is an ER staffing firm. I think that's where a lot of my entrepreneurship came from, because I got to see my dad not just be a doctor, but run the business side of things and have unlimited potential. And then just being, I think growing up in Wyoming, honestly, Wyoming, for lack of a better word, they're pretty individualistic there in Wyoming. And a lot of people in Wyoming are ranchers, oil people, and they're entrepreneurs as well. So that's kind of where my unemployable part came in my life, is I just want to do things my way. And I don't really report to anyone that well. I'm a lot better figuring it out on my own or reporting to myself.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I'm better at reporting to myself as well. So let's talk about this though, because I think this is really a fascinating kind of story here of you having the example of an entrepreneur and corporate man, essentially, right? I mean, you could argue, depending on where you're at, even doctors are self-employed business owners, right? Just in a lot of cases, not always. Some of them have just like W-2'd with the hospital. But a lot of doctors, especially now, you go to the doctor's office and you get a bill from the actual doctor, not necessarily from the hospital. So they're contracting in with the hospital. And I don't know if that's the same way it was with your dad, but I think the reason I bring this up is when you're looking at franchises or the opportunity to go and look at different businesses, there's a lot of different nuances to how you can run a business. And there's no one right way to do that. So talk about a little bit of the differences of the type of franchise. Like what's the process of really identifying what's the best business structure for my personality? Because some people, it might be an entrepreneur, some people might be an intrapreneur, some people might be, hey, I actually want to go be a business owner. Some people love what they do so much they just want to get paid for what they do and they don't want to think about anything else. And sometimes I have clients as well who they own their business and they hire out all of the management, all of the everything else, and they're just like the regular technician because that's what they're passionate about. But rather than doing all the management stuff, they still are just like the tech, but they actually own the business. They just do the grunt work because that's what they like doing, but they own it. So, I mean, there's a lot of different places for somebody. Talk to us about how we could really identify for ourselves maybe where we fit in.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Samuel. Let's talk about business ownership roles first. And this is just across the board, not just with franchises, with any business. You have two basic business ownership roles. One is an owner and operator, and one is a semi-absentee or an executive model. There's lots of different names for them, but those are the two most popular. An owner-operator model is when the owner is working in the business every day, probably 40 to 60 hours a week. They may be the technician. They're definitely at least managing the business on a daily basis. And so they don't have a whole lot of free time for themselves. The business is operating because they're running it. They do have unlimited potential. They own their own business, which is great. Probably could sell it down the road, but they don't have the freedom of time, which is for some people.
I mean, can we just stop there for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think that sometimes we oversell stuff. And I don't think that somebody who's an owner-operator really has unlimited income potential. I think it's like a nice platitude, but the reality is what you said after I think is more true, and that is that you only have 24 hours in a day, and if you want to live somewhat decently long, more than like 3 or 4 weeks, you have to sleep. So you don't really have 24 hours in a day. So the owner-operator doesn't have income, like unlimited income potential, I don't think. Now, if you're an owner-operator, your income potential is capped by the amount of time that it takes to exchange for that. And maybe I'm wrong, so I'm happy to hear kind of a different perspective on that, but that's just kind of been my perspective. If you're an owner-operator, you really are not an unlimited income potential. But I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you, Samuel, in that owner-operator, if they stay in the owner-operator role, they're only going to be able to do as much as what they can in a day, or 24 hours or 12 hours a day or whatever. So they are capped on their bandwidth, so to speak. They can pivot, though. When I say they have unlimited potential, It would be by pivoting to become a semi-absentee, which if a person's an employee, they don't necessarily have that opportunity. So I agree with you, though. If they stay on the owner-operator model, they're going to be limited in their income.
Cool.
A semi-absentee owner is somebody that hires a manager to run the daily affairs of their business. And so the manager is managing the staff, doing the hiring and firing, making sure the technicians are getting the jobs done, things like that. And the owner's making sure the manager's getting that job done. The owner spends probably 5 to 15 hours a week on the business, doing that, not in the business, but on the business. And so that's probably truly the unlimited potential that an owner operator or that a semi-absentee owner can have, is because they can open up multiple businesses at the same time, because they basically outsource somebody to manage those businesses for them. And so that's where the freedom of time comes, is with a semi-absentee. A lot of people have the best of both worlds. They'll keep their job and then open up a business on their side in a semi-absentee ownership model, because they can do full-time in their job and they can do part-time owning a business because they have a manager running it.
Okay.
So it really comes down to, as far as customizing the business to somebody, which model do they want to operate from?
So what types of franchises? Because again, some people, and even myself, I've been surprised at some of the things that, one, are even called businesses, and then two, these businesses, like, they've been franchised, and that's a whole nother, which I want to get into some of the legalities of that, because some companies that are more multi-level marketing structures, they will attempt to present themselves as a franchise when they're not a franchise. And so that creates some deceptive marketing, and then there's legal issues down that road. So what are some maybe more common absentee executive team type franchises versus owner operator? Like what types of things would we be talking about in that scenario?
Okay, that's a good question. Let's see here. Let's pick a franchise. Let's do a haircutting salon. Let's do a hair studio, for example. And let's use Supercuts as an example. Supercuts is a successful franchise, and you'll see an owner of a Supercuts. They may own several, even hundreds of Supercuts, because they have a manager running the Supercuts and hairstylists. They hire people to do the hair and somebody to manage them. And then you have Joanne's Scissors hair studio next door to it. That would be like a non-franchise. And Joanne is in there cutting people's hair every day. And she's at her station. And then she may rent out booths to other hairstylists so they can have their own clients. But Joanne is pretty much running that one business, cutting people's hair every day. And she doesn't have the time to go out and open up other Joanne studios. In order for her to do that, she would have to go develop operating manuals and procedures, and things like that to become a franchise, which she could do, but she's kind of too busy cutting hair and running her own little studio. So I think that would be a big example. Does that kind of explain the difference?
So that explains the difference. I'm just curious, like, what are examples? So haircutting is potentially one of maybe the differences, but what are some, like, well-known, if I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, I'm starting to like the idea of keeping my full-time job and absentee. I know that there's a process to identify this, but like, what are some of my options? Like there's laundry franchises, there's drywall franchises, handyman franchises, like businesses that you think, how is that franchised? But they're franchises, and they're legitimate franchises. They're not the fake ones that people just say, oh, I'm going to franchise out. But they're like legitimate franchises. What are some options there that somebody thinking maybe for like a single mom that could do as an actual franchise that's a doable franchise for somebody in that position? And maybe somebody who's got a more full-time time frame, maybe they work full-time, they have part-time, and they just want to go start another franchise to start earning some extra income. What are some like realistic options for those people?
Okay. Are you looking for brand names or just in general?
I mean, brand names or industries, because brand names don't really matter, because that's going to change probably by location and where you're at in the world. But industries, I think, is helpful.
Okay, that's a great question. So food service obviously is a huge industry in franchising. McDonald's, Wendy's, Del Taco. I don't work in food service myself, but that is a successful industry. The reason I don't work in it is because the profit margins are fairly slim, and it's a lot of money to get started in the food service franchise, usually. So it's kind of a big barrier to entry. Some other industries that are really successful would be like home services. industry, like painting companies, plumbing companies, restoration companies that come in and take care of fire, mold, or water damage to the house or business. Cleaning companies, Made Right would be a successful cleaning service. And then on the bricks and mortar side, you have businesses in the wellness industry and the boutique fitness. So I think probably one of the most popular boutique fitness brands out there is called Orange Theory. You've probably heard of them before. Most people have. It's a really successful franchise, but it's in the fitness industry. Then you have things in the wellness industry, like aesthetics, like facials, massages, things like that would be in the wellness. Massage envy probably would be a good idea of something in the wellness industry. What I like to do is I like to find out what their price range is and where they kind of are focused on. I separate in between services and bricks and mortar. Service businesses are less expensive to start up. The service business would be like the home services industry that I just talked about, plumbing, painting, things like that. You can run those things from home, actually, because all you need is a van and a trailer and some technicians to go to the work, so there are less startup costs to run. They also can be economic resistant. So if the economy goes down, these are needed services. People still have to get their things plumbed and fixed and stuff, no matter what the economy is doing. So the recession resistant is what I call it. They're a little bit safer. Then you have on the bricks and mortar side, that would be like Orange Theory, Massage Envy, the wellness and fitness industry, and food service as well. So those ones are a little more expensive because of the retail and the bricks and mortar aspect of it. So when I talk to somebody, I find out what the price range is and what they tend to see themselves doing, more a service industry or a bricks and mortar type industry.
Yeah, because you're essentially a matchmaker. So imagine, I watch a decent amount of TV, to say the least, and I really like the drama type shows like Love is Blind or Are You the One or Love Island or whatever. Like I'm all for it, Bachelorette, whatever. So when you're doing this, you got to find out obviously the objective is to have the highest degree of success. You got to find out, okay, once we lock down person A, that's a fixed constant. And in your case, the fixed constant is said franchise. Now, yeah, you have a lot of different fixed constants, but those are the fixed constants. And then when you meet somebody, what's that interview process? How do you really help somebody identify? Because in my mind, there's a few things that I would want to look at as just a potential franchisee, right? One is, for me, it would be important to know that I'm actually passionate about it. But maybe because if I'm going to an absentee model, maybe I don't even care if I'm passionate about it as long as it returns money. And so what's the weight when you're helping somebody identify that? Does it actually matter if they're interested or passionate about it? Or do you just purely make a financial decision? And how do you help somebody determine what's going to be best for them?
Yeah, no, I love this question. So it depends on the person, Samuel. Sometimes a person really wants to have passion in their business, and so we'll find a business that they're passionate about. Sometimes people they only care about the financial part of it, and they don't care if they have a passion, and we'll look for businesses that they don't care about that. But what I do with my candidates is I ask them to rate their interest in three areas: the money area, how important is it for their business to make a lot of money? The passion area, how important is it for their business to give them passion or for them to have a passion for their business? And then the third area is called the intangible area. How important is it for their business to give them the intangibles that a business can give them? So some intangibles would be like free time with my family, money to donate to my church or to my charity, an opportunity to be a mentor to my employees would be an intangible too. So there's more intangibles, but I ask my candidates to rate how important each one of those areas is to them. And then we go focus on the franchise that can give them the most bang for the buck in those certain areas. One thing I caution people about chasing their passions in business is it can get in the way. So I like to use an example of a golfer. We got a guy that really enjoys playing golf every day of the week. So he decides to go open a golf store because that's his passion. But now he finds himself working in a golf store every day of the week, selling golf clubs, matching shoes to people, and he never gets out to play golf anymore. This is an example where the passion got in their way. And now they can't have that passion anymore because they can't get on the golf course. So I try to match people to make sure that doesn't get in the way. so that they actually have a passion for it, but they can grow their business too.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you kind of isolating that and explaining it. And guys, for you're listening, this is why one of the reasons I was excited to have him on here. Because for me, I think, well, let's put it this way. My little sister recently passed away, and it brought a lot of things into more closer perspective. You know, like when you're zooming and in and out and you're just trying to find where's that crisp image. And for me, it brought into perspective a few different things. One is, you know, how am I going to be remembered? It's fascinating, man. I was so my sister, she impacted people all over the world, had a wonderful, I think she's going to have a wonderful legacy and stuff. But because of her gypsy lifestyle and my gypsy lifestyle and our family, it's kind of weird to think about. Who's going to show up at your funeral? And is anybody, right? Because one of the and the other thing that came to mind is like, where do I want to be buried?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, so my wife and I have talked about it. My little sister, she chose to be cremated, and judging off of this experience, that option seems more realistic to me. Our world went from a world where we were localized and we'd stay in the same thing. You have 6 generations, and you actually could go visit the funeral, the what do they even call it? Not the funeral place, but place where dead people stay. Cemetery. The cemetery. That's what it is. The cemetery. I'm like, I don't even know what this thing's called anymore. Okay. So the cemetery, people would go visit and put flowers on people's graves and stuff. But now in our fast-paced world where we're more connected than anywhere, people want to be able to take a piece of you with them. If you know, you can't. Nobody's going to fly on Mother's Day. You're not going to fly across the country to go put flowers on your mom's grave. Most likely. Now, maybe that's a franchise idea. You get a service that goes puts friends. I mean, you know, that's an option. But most people, they're not going to go travel those lengths for just one day or for whatever that is. So then it's like, man, maybe because of our economic and world shift in consciousness, then the idea of a funeral is kind of an interesting concept. And we had people attending from all over the world on Zoom for my little sister's funeral, and yet the people in the room, there was maybe 100 people there, 150 people there. But it wasn't like there was tons of people. And then you got to determine where you want to get buried. And my wife's like, I want to be buried by my parents and all this stuff. When you're thinking about a business, for me, that became a lot more in focus. How do I want to be remembered? What are people going to be saying about me? What are my core values? And what really brings fulfillment? Because you just never know how long you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'd be a real shame if you went and chose this business and it didn't actually provide you with what you were actually seeking for because you didn't know. You saw your friend get into a business and you're like, oh, that looks good because it fits their lifestyle. And then you say, well, I'll go do the same thing. And in reality, it doesn't actually align with your values, what you're passionate about. It doesn't align with anything. And then you are stuck in this franchise. So having a coach in all areas of life, I think, is really important. But I can't think of if you're going to get into franchising, you better find somebody who can matchmake you like Matt and make sure you're good. Can you share some examples of when it's been really successful and maybe some examples of where you've seen franchisees, I guess, get into something that they just weren't really happy with and that they wish they would have known before they got in, that they just didn't. Not that things weren't disclosed, because I know there's a lot of regulation, which we'll talk about in a second, around that, but maybe they just didn't fully comprehend what it is they were getting into originally.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's a great, I'll come up with some scenarios. I want to talk about the word invigoration because that can be mistaken with the word passion. They're not interchangeable. So what I like to ask my candidates is, what do you think is going to invigorate you? Meaning, when you go to bed at night, what are you going to be doing when you go to bed at night that you're going to be excited to wake up in the morning to continue doing? And what are you going to be excited about waking up in the morning to do for that day and looking forward to that day? It might not necessarily be your passion, but it could be something that invigorates you. Mentoring a team would be invigorating. Maybe painting a house would be invigorating too, because you're making somebody's house pretty or beautiful, or you're just leaving the world a better place. But I think invigorating is the most important thing that people should think about when they buy a business or a franchise, something that will invigorate them. So for an example that wouldn't be a great matchmaker, what I've seen people buy a Subway for example. And I think Subway is a great franchise, by the way. I'm not bad mouthing them.
Sure.
They're really successful and one of the most successful franchises in the whole entire world. But there have been a lot of people that have bought a Subway, and after a year or two into it, they realize that their Subway's probably making $30,000 to $40,000, not as much as what they expected. But on top of that, they have a high turnover in their staff because the people that work at Subway usually don't stay there for very long. And the business owner just didn't think about that going into it, thinking, well, I'm probably going to have a high turnover. And so hiring and firing is going to be just a constant process for me. They go into it thinking, I'm going to hire this staff, they're going to stick around for a long time. And then they're just completely frustrated because their staff is interchanging all the time. So that would be one example of something that a characteristic of that business they didn't consider going into it. And these people end up selling their business to somebody that do want to take on that characteristic, which is okay, but that would be an important thing. Another thing is kids. Sometimes people buy a franchise that caters to kids. I think Code Ninjas is probably a really popular franchise where kids can go learn how to code. But there have been franchisees with Code Ninjas that go into it and they just, for some reason, didn't really think about that they were going to be working with kids, or their business would be working with kids and all the things that comes with. And so after a year or two, they realized, I just didn't really enjoy working with kids. I think I want to move on because this doesn't invigorate me as much as I thought it would. So just those really simple things that people need to think about. What's their business going to look like in 2 or 3 years? What are the problems and things they're going to be dealing with in 2 or 3 years to consider now before they put the money down?
Right. So then what, from a legal perspective, again, because although I know this, I don't know that the whole audience knows this, but let's talk about the legal perspective of what really separates the different types of, like, specifically a franchise versus maybe a multi-level marketing structure, which, again, I'm not against any or all. I think they all have their own merit. People make millions of dollars in everything, and people fail in everything. So there's no one winner from that perspective. But what's the kind of difference between a brokerage type model, a franchise model, and a multi-level marketing model? Like, how would you separate the differences, and maybe what you're more inclined to as a person? I mean, I know you're specifically trying to matchmake franchisees, but during that process, if you find out that somebody is more inclined and more suited for a multi-level marketing structure, maybe you're not the person to go help them find the right one, or even a brokerage structure. But how do you identify and how do they legally separate the definitions between those three?
Okay, no, that's good. So let's talk about a franchise real quick. A franchise, when a person buys a franchise, they pay an upfront franchise fee. Depends on which franchise they buy and how much it's going to cost. And then they'll pay royalties. So a percentage of the gross income will go to the franchisor, and that's their revenue source. The franchisee is paying the franchisor that royalty to get support from that franchisor. They're paying that franchise fee up front to get the systems and processes that the franchise has already come up with, the marketing plans, the operation manuals, the HR systems, all that type of stuff. It's like a business in a box, so to speak. And that's what you're buying with a franchise. With a multi-level company, it's not technically a license, but that's pretty much what it is. You're not paying an upfront franchise fee. You're paying probably an upfront amount of money to buy certain products. And then your job is to go out and market those products and sell those products, get a downline to help you do that. But you're making overrides on the downline. So when those products are sold, it's broke down into, percentages. The multi-level company gets a certain percentage. The director gets a percentage. The salesperson gets a percentage, and you just move up depending on what your volume is. But there's no real franchise fee and there's no royalties. It's just overrides on what the profit margin is.
So question, just really quick, because it's something I wrote down here. So for a royalty, are there any franchisees or franchisors, I guess, that do have their royalty be a percentage based on revenues, like gross revenues? Or are all franchisees just, hey, this is a flat, you pay your franchise fee every year or whatever it is, and you pay your royalties, and it's a fixed number, whether you made money or lost money, doesn't matter, you got to pay your fee? Or is it percentage based off of profits or?
Yeah, no, that's So it depends. The franchises can set up how they want to. Some franchises, they'll have a flat fee every month that a franchisee pays. Doesn't matter how much money they make or how much money they don't make, they got to pay that flat fee. Most franchises are charging a royalty. So let's say like 7% of gross revenue. So let's say the business made $30,000 that month. Then the franchise gets 7% of that $30,000. The cool thing about that is that the more profitable the franchisee is, the more profitable the franchisor is. And so the franchisor has a vested interest in that franchisee being successful. Some franchises will do a hybrid. They'll charge a little bit of a flat fee and a smaller royalty on top. So it just depends on the franchises, but most of them charge a royalty on.
So again, I'm going to go back to then the MLM structure. What then is the difference there? Because it sounds just like at least one layer. There's at least one layer of the franchisor is making potentially a percentage spread off of whatever they're able to duplicate underneath them. So how is that different in that scenario than a multi-level marketing scenario?
So
from a legal perspective, right? Because we can drop all types of charts to define it however way. And I know people in every industry is going to defend themselves. I'm not trying to defend anything. I'm just trying to, from a legal perspective, how is the legal system differentiating these?
Okay. So when I talk about overrides, that's different than a royalty. So if the multi-level marketing system, in most cases, they sell a product. Let's say it costs headquarters $5 to make that product, okay? And then their representatives sell it for $100. So there's a $95 profit margin on that product. And that $95 is broken up across the sales team, the networks. So, you have different levels. One, you get the sales associate, for example, gets 30% of that profit margin. Then you get the marketing director that gets 10% of that profit margin. So does that make sense? So they're getting overrides on the profit margin of the product, not the gross revenue.
I mean, I hear that. I mean, I think that we could just call those different. I mean, I guess technically it'd be net revenue rather than gross revenue because we're talking about the profit margin versus the gross revenues. But ultimately, if we said $95 was the gross revenue because we minused out the expense of the actual thing to make it, then aren't we talking about the same thing? Is it all semantics or is it actually different things?
Well, I think
with your employee at the very bottom, he gets paid less, and then the manager gets paid a little bit more, and then and there has to be enough money coming in to pay everybody, or that's called a failing business to go bankrupt. So there has to be some level of that. I'm just trying to differentiate from how do we determine? No, because you're a percentage based. Because I did summer sales, right? And most people would say summer sales, that's not multi-level marketing. That's in the franchise side. But as a summer sales guy, who you're encouraged to go build a team, and you get a spread off of once your team hits X numbers, and you get bonuses, and you're getting for every I sold pest control, right? So every door they sold pest control to, I get a percentage of. Like if it was $100 payment, that person's at a 65% contract rate. They're getting 65%, and I'm going to get paid 15% on everything that was written. I'm getting $15 for every door that got sold. There's legal battles in this, like whether it's a W-2 job, whether it's a 1099 job. Like there's a lot of legal stuff going on. I'm just curious, like how do we actually, as a lay person who's like considering getting into any one of these, how do you really know what you're getting into?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's, like you said, there's legal issues on that. They have to be upfront on whether they're an MLM company, a network marketing company, or a franchise. I don't know what the legal definitions for each of them are, but there are legal definitions. So that'd be the first thing I'd do if I was looking into a business opportunity, is to find out if they're a franchise or a multi-level marketing company.
Okay. And with this, because you're a matchmaker here, what's the what do they call it? I don't know what they call it actually, but it's like the courtship period. You have to. So some of the laws around, I don't know all of them or all the details, so I'm hoping you can just fill this in. But I think a big indicator between a multi-level marketing, from my experience, so you correct me or fill in the gaps that you know. And a franchise is franchise. One, there's a certain level of disclosures that must go into a franchise acquiring a franchise. And along with those disclosures, there's different phases of acquiring a franchise where there's like almost like a due diligence phase, and then there's a cool off phase where after you think, hey, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to sign it, then you have to wait X amount of days before you're actually legally allowed to buy into the franchise to make sure that you're not making a hurried decision. And you're going to see that differently in different industries. So go through some of those, just like I don't even know what they call them, just the process of getting into a franchise.
You're helping me answer the question, Samuel. I appreciate that.
I've had these conversations a few times, but everybody has a different perspective. So that's why I'm like asking the nitties gritty about it.
So with a franchise has to give we call them a candidate. That would be the person interested in buying the franchise. They have to give them what's called a franchise disclosure document, or FDD for short. And that's required by the Federal Trade Commission for the franchise to give that to the candidate. Most franchises are going to have the candidate sign, usually by DocuSign, that they've received that document. That document goes over several things about the franchise, but some of the things it goes over is any lawsuits the franchise has against them, any criminal activity that the executives of the franchise have going on, any bankruptcies that they've had on in the past or going through right now. Definitely talks about the startup costs for one location of the franchise. There's also a section, they're not required to put the section in, but a lot of them do. It's called the Item 19, and that's where they disclose how much franchisees are making across their system. And then, of course, it talks about the royalties, how much they'd be paying in royalties, and all the legal information the franchisee would be responsible for if they bought it, as well as what the franchisor would be responsible to provide to the franchisee. So it's a lot more in detail. With a multi-level marketing company, that just doesn't exist. You just decide if to buy it or not. Going back to the franchises, once somebody decides to buy a franchise, they can't buy a franchise until they've had that financial disclosure document for 7 days. And then they can put their money down and buy the franchise. So that's the cooling off period, I think, that you're talking about.
Yeah, so with that 7 days, and again, anybody who's bought a house will understand this question, but are they actually required to review it all? Or is it just like, and you work as a financial advisor, so this happens with like prospectuses as well, where somebody's like, oh yeah, buy these mutual funds. By law, I have to show you this, but nobody freaking knows what they're buying. They're just like, sure, this guy said that. So by law, there's a legal requirement to offer or make sure somebody has access to all the disclosures. There's not necessarily, and when you buy a house, there's like a mountain of paper, and there's like sign here, and you're like, well, what does it all say? And you're like, I don't have 3 years for you to read this 4,500 page manual of the contract of buying a house. Basically what it says is you get the house and we get the money. Like that's the short and dirty of it. Okay. So most people don't read it. You use your iPhone. You say, yes, I agree. Because if you say, no, I don't agree, you don't get to use your iPhone. So you freaking just say, I agree. So is there, cause this gets into like, and there's current law cases happening around this. So it's, I'm not going to comment on those specifically, but I'm just curious, do you see that being a push where there's actual some legal standard that they actually have to be reviewed in detail with them, or just do you think it's going to keep a standard? Hey, we just have to make sure they have access to it for 7 days, and then whatever, whether they do it or not, that's their own fault. If we gave them the option to do due diligence and they didn't take advantage of it, and then they invested with us, that's on them, right? We did our legal standard of due diligence for us. You know, like, do you think that's going to change, or is that just going to be pretty much how it is, do you think?
I don't know if it's going to change. I guess it probably depends on how many lawsuits are going on out there, and if it gets overly burdensome to the court system. But right now, there's no way for the franchisor to make sure the franchisee read that document. All they can do is make sure that the franchisee received that document. Now, a good franchisor will follow up after that document is sent. Usually that document's sent in about the second step of the due diligence process. And so there's about 4 or 5 more steps after that the franchisee goes through. And a good franchisor is going to check up on the franchisee and ask them, hey, did you check this out? What do your numbers look like? Things like that. Just ask them questions that would indicate if the franchisee read the document, but it's not really their responsibility. At the end of the game, the franchisor ultimately gets to decide if that franchisee can be or that candidate can be the franchisee. And if they feel like that franchisee hasn't done their due diligence and would be a liability to them, they're going to probably tell that candidate that it's not going to be a good fit. That's how franchisors can protect themselves and also protect candidates from making wrong decisions too. But not every franchise does that, and they're certainly not legally required to do all that either. Just provide them the document, and that's what they're legally required to do.
It's interesting because you're in Utah. I came from Utah, and I think Utah's the MLM capital of the world, which is not a bad thing. Again, like I have no problem with either. I think that, and this goes with anything in life, right? And we're talking about legacy, like that's kind of what the show is about, although we're talking about franchises as well. But there, about 10 years ago, it came up in Congress, and there's a part of the world said, part of the lobbyists said, hey, we want to make all MLMs, even though they're MLMs, the FTC wanted to make them have the same level of disclosures and cool-off period as franchises. And the MLM lobbyists won, and they tabled it for 10 years. And it's coming back up here in a year or two to review this. And since then, there's been like LuLaRoe. There's been a few different bigger national televised things that are showing kind of the dangers of the MLM. And I think it's interesting because some of the MLM space, they don't want those disclosures to be, because it potentially slows their ability to build a team, which, although I understand and I can comprehend the issue there, I think the more disclosures, the more things you can show somebody. Like when I went and did summer sales, they told me, look, you're going to have to knock about 100 doors to get a sale until you get better. And then you'll get better, and maybe you'll only knock 20 to get a sale at the end. And like, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are, as long as you know, hey, if I run the numbers, I can be successful. I think a lot of the deception comes in is like, you never even know what the numbers are. So then you think you're getting in, and there's more gray area of what can be successful. And it's like, it really just, here's the statistics. This is how many people from when they sign up, they make it to the first stage, third stage, and this is how many people we've made millionaires. Do you want in or not? And my guess is that MLMs in general have created more millionaires than a lot of other industries. From a general perspective, that doesn't mean that they're good or bad. It's just like they have created more in a lot of cases. So then what's the value there? And are you ready to go through all that effort? So very, very fascinating in that regard. So what's your role as the matchmaker? How do you kind of manage that process of, yes, it's not really the due diligence requirement of the franchisor to get that to happen, but how much effort do you put in as the middleman to make sure, and not just the prep work, to make sure you're even looking at the top 3 that actually fit their goals, but then also once they've engaged with this firm, how do you help them get in touch with other franchisees, other people who have maybe had success or didn't have success, so they can hear the testimonials or ask all their questions to make sure that they find out that if they don't like working with kids and that's a big issue, don't buy this one,
Yeah, right. So with me personally, there's lots of franchise consultants out there, and a lot of them use different processes, and so I'll speak for myself though, because I can't speak for all of them. What I do, once I introduce 3 or 4 franchises to my candidate, I put them in touch directly with the franchise themselves. And that's when my candidates start the due diligence process. At that time, I take more of a coaching mentorship role, and I meet with my candidates at least once a week, usually on Zoom, to go over what they've learned through their due diligence process. And that's where I do my best to persuade them and make sure that they are looking at that FDD and things. The franchise, a successful franchise or a good franchise, is going to put that candidate in touch with other franchisees that are up and operating. And we call that in the industry called validation calls. I can't do that because I'm not the franchisor, but so the franchisor is the only one that has the power to do that. But a good franchisor, that's part of their process. They're going to put that franchisee in touch with a lot of different they're going to put that candidate in touch with a lot of different franchisees to ask that franchisees open form questions so that candidate can find out if this is going to be something they want to do. They can look for the pitfalls. If the franchisee likes the franchisor, if they do it all over again, things to be aware of, how much do they spend, all that type of stuff. Really important step of the process. Some franchisors don't do that at all, but the good ones will do that.
Okay.
Another step in the process is called, some people call it discovery day. This is one of the last steps in the process. Not all franchisors do this, but the good ones do. They have their candidate come out to their headquarters and meet the executive staff and probably visit franchise locations and spend 2 days at headquarters to meet I call it meet the parents day. They're going to meet the parents before they actually marry them. But that's a really important step of the process for the candidate to do, to find out if they resonate with the culture, the core values, and if they can see themselves doing that.
And is it, so I recently bought a house, moved down to Arizona, and when at first our realtor's like, no, we can only put in one offer per house until we get one. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing ever, because like the market's insane. And by the time we get an offer in on a house that just went on the market, it's gone. So like, let's put 6 offers out. Here's the list of houses that I'd be okay being in. Offer on all of them, and then we'll get what we get. I'm okay living anywhere. I just want out of Utah. That was and some people are more particular. I get it. For me, I was like, just get me out of Utah, down in this area. Here's a list of houses that I'm willing to be in. And he's like, well, you haven't seen it. And I was like, I don't care. It's out of Utah, so we'll be fine, Yeah. And, but is it kosher to begin the initial find out phase with multiple franchisors at the same time, so you kind of compare and contrast? Or is it like, hey, let's go with one and then we'll identify and then we'll go to the next one and then we'll go to the next one? What's the kosher way of doing that?
I think the most efficient way is to look at 3 or 4 franchises at the same time. And I ask my candidates to have at least 2 meetings with each franchise first before they start eliminating the ones they're not interested in anymore. But after they meet with the franchise 2 times, they're going to get financials and enough information to decide if they want to go further. And then as they go through the process, they start funneling down to just one franchise to focus on. But the shotgun approach, kind of like what you did when you bought your property there in Arizona, made the multiple offers approach, I think is the best way to go, so they can compare and contrast.
That's what I did with dating. It worked out pretty well. Just dating 5 or 6 girls at the same time, and slowly eliminated them.
Right.
No, really though, it was a good time. I'm glad that my wife still loves me after the dating process, but we both vetted each other pretty hard. Awesome. So if somebody wanted to just get in contact with you, see if franchising is the right move for them, how would they get in touch with you? Where's the best place to contact you?
So probably the best thing is they can email me. It's Matt with 2 T's at learn2franchise.com. And the 2 is a number 2. So learn2franchise.com. Put in the subject line, or just tell me something interesting about yourself or what you're looking for. I'll reply to you, and I also send you my free ebook. It's I think it's the top 7 industries that I think are profitable in franchising right now. That's free. So it kind of goes along the lines of what we talked about earlier, but the top industries that franchises are in. I have an ebook about that. So that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Love that. So here's called rapid fire. So it's just 5 questions, 1 word to 1 sentence answers, just to kind of gauge where you're at in your legacy journey. So first question is, what do you believe is holding you back from reaching the next level of your legacy today?
I would say bandwidth right now. I need more hands on deck to expand.
Okay. And what is the hardest thing you've ever accomplished?
Hardest thing I've ever accomplished probably would be pivoting several times in my career, but moving, if something's not working, moving on to something else. I have this stubborn personality that I will just go. But I've had to learn through pain that, if something's not working, I should pivot fairly quickly and move to something that is working.
Sure. And then what is your greatest success to this point in your life?
Well, I could say my 5 boys. That's something, they're all really good kids. But I probably would, along with that in business, I would say being able to to start from the ground floor, a few different businesses, and then systematize them and then sell them in and out of the franchise space has been probably I think what I'm most proud of.
That's awesome. And then what are one or two books you believe contribute most to your success?
So in business, I definitely love The E-Myth Revisited. I read that when I first came out of college. It's amazing. I still read it a lot. It's a great, great book on how to run a business. And then my other book is called The Happiness Advantage. And that's really helped me how to change my perspective on life. I recommend that one as a great book too.
Yeah, that one I feel like is a little older, but it's a great book.
Yeah, I think it's a few years. Mm-hmm.
Is that the one by Sean Acker? Sean Acker?
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good book. So this is a final question here, and that is, if in 6 generations from now, your kids have had kids, have had kids, have had kids, 6 generations from now, how do you hope your great grandchildren are talking about you and what your life meant, the impact you had 6 generations from now?
I'd like them to look back and say, "Wow, great grandpa, he was really invested in helping people out, and he really enjoyed helping people out in whatever path they were in life. He left a positive footprint on anybody he came across."
That's awesome. Hey, well, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your knowledge. And I know some of the questions were tough, but I think it's in these details that people sometimes overlook. They just get like, oh, this sounds like a good idea. And I prefer to provide as much value as far as, hey, these are your options. So thank you for sitting in the hot seat today, letting me grill you a little bit. And definitely, if there's anything I can ever do to assist you in your journey, let me know. And for the Fuel Your Legacy audience, go rank and review this. Reach out to Matt and just see if you're a good fit. I mean, you might think, there's no way I ever want a franchise. And you might be surprised at some of the things that are options for you to supplement your income. It's a core belief of mine. And I'm sure Matt shares this in one form or another, but with inflation the way it is, I don't see any way of financial survival moving forward other than some form of business ownership. And some people don't want to hear that. It's tough to hear, especially if you're working a W-2 job and you think that that's the answer. But I just don't think moving forward you're going to be able to survive without some form of income that can adjust with inflation faster than your income. Because a 2 to 3% raise is a 4 to 7% decrease in lifestyle right now. So be aware. That's all. Just be aware and reach out to Matt and see if it right now is the right time for you. That's all I'd say. Because it may or may not be. Nobody knows, but you may as well find out. So we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show.
Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.